Welcome back. All right, so we are going to discuss the playoff history of the Boston Bruins from 1999-2000 through until 2020-2021. And of course, it's a history that, you'll see there's a lot of Montreal logos on the board. And I mentioned this, that Boston-Montreal is a bad matchup for Boston. In the playoffs, it really traditionally has been. Now, that history has changed somewhat in recent years, the last few decades, I'll say since the late 80s, but it is not that unusual for me as a Boston fan to watch Montreal celebrate, kind of hang my head and go, well, that is what tends to happen when these teams play against each other. So we'll start with 99-2000, and this is right around where it's at its lowest point in this part of their history. Ray Bourque's gone to Colorado. Boston is really in a mess, and it's kind of ugly. So they finished 24, 33, 19, and 6. No playoffs. Joe Thornton's the leading scorer, 81 games, 23 goals, 37 assists, 60 points. And he's making that progression from year to year. Of course, Thornton will go on to be traded to San Jose in a move that, we all had questions about at the time. 2000, 2001. They finished 36, 30, 8, and 8. Also, no playoffs. Jason Allison's their leading scorer in 82 games, 36 goals, 59 assists, 95 points. Allison, yes, from that generation, one of the more underrated forwards overall in the NHL. At some point, I'll do a career video on Allison as well. 2001, 2002, they finished 43, 24, 6, and 9. They lost in the first round against Montreal, so they make it to the playoffs, and Montreal's waiting for them like, where have you guys been? And you're gone. Go golfing. So they knocked him out in 6. Samsonov is the leading scorer. 74 games, 29 goals, 41 assists, 70 points. And I say Samsonov, even though we called him Samsonov at the time. So, right? Because we have a Samsonov in the league right now. So maybe we were all pronouncing Samsonov the wrong way back then. But in the playoffs, he records 2 goals, 2 assists, 4 points in 6 games. The interesting thing, too, is that Samsonov and Thornton were top draft picks for Boston who would both get traded out. While they were still relatively young. 2002, 2003, Boston finishes with a disappointing record of 36, 31, 11, and 4, but they make the playoffs. And they lose in the first round against the New Jersey Devils in 5. The Devils, I remember, gave Boston fits late 80s, early 2000s, but they weren't alone. New Jersey gave a lot of teams fits in that period. Joe Thornton leads them in scoring with a fantastic season, 77 games, 36 goals, 65 assists, 101 points. In the playoffs, 5 games played, 1 goal, 2 assists for 3 points. So 2003, 2004, the last year before we end up with a salary cap and we have that lockout and all that, they finished 41, 19, 15, and 7. And who's waiting for them in the playoffs? The guys who are ready to send them golfing, Montreal. Montreal beats them in 7. So once again, Montreal against Boston is a bad matchup for Boston. Joe Thornton leads them in scoring again, 77 games, 23 goals, 50 assists, 73 points. But in the playoffs, he is held without a point in 7 games. And that is the comment with Joe Thornton, and I swear it's dogged him to this day, that in the playoffs, he does not produce enough. And we saw that storyline in San Jose as well, and he was joined with Marleau in that conversation too. So we go to 05-06. And this is the year where Thornton gets traded. Boston doesn't make the playoffs. 29, 37, and 16. If I had a channel at that point, I would have had some very strong opinions about the direction of the Boston Bruins. Bergeron is their leading scorer that year. 81 games, 31 goals, 42 assists, 73 points. Patrice Bergeron is one of those players who has absolutely gotten better and better and better as he's gotten older. But he had a great year in 05-06. Not very many Bruins seem to have a great season that year. 2006, 2007, they finished 31, 41, and 6. Again, no playoffs. Marc Savard's their leading scorer. 82 games, 22 goals, 74 assists for 96 points. Very good year for Savard. They don't make the playoffs. The following year they do. They finish 41, 29, and 12 in 2007, 2008. Who's waiting for them? Montreal. Montreal takes them out in 7. So, again, that's a game 7. That's twice in 4 years. Boston makes the playoffs. Both years they win 41 games, and both years Montreal knocks them out. So, in game 7. Savard, the leading scorer again, 74 games, 15 goals, 63 assists for 78 points. In the 7 playoff games, he records a goal and 5 assists. So, Savard leading scorer, and Montreal taking them out 3 times out of the last 4 they had been to the playoffs. 2008-2009, Boston finishes with an impressive record of 53-19-10, and in the first round, they swept Montreal. So here we go. And then in the second round, they lost in 7 against Carolina. So not a huge fan of Game 7s at that point in my Boston fandom. Savard's the leading scorer again, 82 games, 25 goals, 63 assists for 88 points. And in the playoffs, 11 games played, 6 goals, 7 assists for 13 points. So 2009-2010, a playoff that basically broke me. They finished 39-30-13 during the regular season. They knocked out Buffalo in 6 in the first round, and then they played Philly in the second round. They were up 3-0. Then they lost 3 in a row. Then in Game 7, they were up 3-0. Then they lost the game. So Boston loses in 7 against Philadelphia, but they'd remember that. Bergeron's the leading scorer, 73 games, only 19 goals, and 33 assists for 52 points. But in the playoffs, 13 games, 4 goals, 7 assists, 11 points. Bergeron is a big game guy and shows up every playoffs. 2010-2011, Boston had a record of 46-25-11. And I don't remember anybody seeing them as being big Stanley Cup threats going into the 2011 playoffs. And in the first round, they play Montreal. It goes to Game 7. I am completely ready for what's going to happen in Game 7 and ready for that to be Boston losing it again. However, they knocked them out in Game 7. And then they swept Philadelphia. So I've talked before about how Tampa Bay being swept by Columbus might have been the best thing for Tampa Bay, and that it focused them and they didn't, lose out for 2020 and 2021's playoffs. I really think that 3-0 comeback by Philadelphia woke up the Boston Bruins, and they won that one in 4. Then they went in 7 against Tampa. And I'm going to mention, too, that in that conference final, the controversial part of that final game was that there were no penalties. Tampa Bay's power play was lethal. So the fact there were no penalties in that game did have an effect. Boston wins it, nail biter, and goes on to play Vancouver in the finals. They beat Vancouver in 7. When you look at the overall scoring, I think it was like 21-8, 22-7, something like that. The overall scoring greatly favors Boston. But in the end, the home team won every game until Game 7. Boston wins on the road and knocks out the Vancouver Canucks to win the Stanley Cup. Lucic was their leading scorer that year. 79 games, 30 goals, 32 assists for 62 points. In the playoffs, he adds 5 goals and 7 assists for 12 points in 25 games. So Boston wins the Cup. How do they defend against it? Well, they defended it first by having a better regular season than they did the year before. They finished 49-29-4, but they met Washington in the first round. And Tim Thomas is out. Tuukka Rask is in. Tuukka Rask doesn't have the greatest record against the Caps. They lose in 7. Tyler Seguin, 81 games, 29 goals, 38 assists for 67 points, is their leading scorer. In the playoffs, in 7 games, he's held to 2 goals and an assist. 2012-2013, they had an excellent regular season record of 28-14-6. In the playoffs, they beat Toronto in 7. They were down against Toronto. We know the storyline. If you're a Toronto fan, you know the storyline. They're down in that third period. They came back and they won it. And then they beat the Rangers in 5 in the second round. And then they swept Pittsburgh in the conference finals with authority. So they meet Chicago in the final. And at points during that final, I could see like a glimmer of hope that maybe Boston was going to win their second cup in 3 years. But Chicago was too much for them. Take them out in 6. Marchand's the leading scorer, 45 games, 18 goals, 18 assists for 36 points. And in the playoffs, 22 games, 4 goals, 9 assists for 13 points for Brad Marchand. So we move on to 2013-2014. The record is 54-19-9. Round 1, they take out Detroit in 5. Well, guess who's waiting for them in the second round? It's Montreal. Guess what happens in that series? It goes to 7, and Montreal wins Game 7. So that's 3 out of 4 Game 7s between Montreal and Boston, won by Montreal. It's a bad matchup for Boston. Krejci, 80 games played, leading scorer with 19 goals, 50 assists for 69 points. In the playoffs, he plays all 12 games, but he only records 4 assists. So we go to 2014-2015. They finished 41-27-14. They have good record, good points, but no playoffs. Bergeron's the leading scorer, 81 games, 23 goals, 32 assists, 55 points. The following season, they missed the playoffs again, and they were close both years. 42-31-9. And that's why when people say, well, they went through a retool, not really, because they never had a bad record. This was never a team that finished that far out of the playoffs. So they missed the playoffs that year. Bergeron's the leading scorer again, 80 games, 32 goals, 36 assists, 68 points. And again, it's Bergeron getting better and better every single year. 2016-2017, they finished with a record of 44-31-7. They're back in the playoffs, but and they're back in the playoffs with only like an extra. I think they had 2 extra points from one year over the other, and they make the playoffs. So it's that close. Ottawa takes them out in 6. What I remember from that series is Boston's blue line being decimated. So Marchand's the leading scorer, 80 games, 39 goals, 46 assists for 85 points. In the playoffs, 6 games, 1 goal, 3 assists for 4 points. 2017-2018, they win 50 games. So they finished 50, 20, and 12. In the first round, they take out Toronto in 7. I apologize, Toronto fans. I know you guys feel the same way about Game 7s against Boston as I would as a Boston fan about Montreal. But then in the second round, Boston loses to Tampa in 5, as Tampa is building themselves up to becoming champions soon enough. Marchand was the leading scorer again, 68 games, 34 goals, 51 assists, 85 points. That was a year where I started saying, hey, maybe Marchand's like a Hart contender. Wasn't popular opinion, but I still think Marchand, if it wasn't Brad Marchand, just from the stats and the way he plays, I think he would get more Hart consideration. In the playoffs, he has 4 goals and 13 assists for 17 points in 12 games. 2018-2019, Boston finishes 49-24-9. So again, very good regular season numbers. First round, they take out Toronto in 7. Again, apologies to Toronto fans. Columbus, they take out in 6 in the second round. That is the only time Columbus has ever got out of the first round, and they play Boston in the second round after upsetting Tampa. So they did Boston a favor because Tampa is now that bad matchup for Boston. And in the conference finals, they sweep Carolina in 4 straight. Then in the Stanley Cup final, a very close nail-biter of a Stanley Cup final, the St. Louis Blues win it in 7. So Boston loses another Stanley Cup final. Not entirely a surprise for me in that I've seen them lose a lot of Stanley Cup finals over my lifetime. I've mentioned that in videos before. Marchand's the leading scorer again, 79 games, 36 goals, 64 assists, 100 points. In the playoffs, 24 games, 9 goals, 14 assists for 23 points. 2019-2020, they finish 44, 14, and 12. President's Trophy. Well, what the President's Trophy means is you're not going to win the cup. First round, they beat Carolina in 5, so Carolina doesn't like seeing Boston either. And then in the second round, they lost in 5 against the Tampa Bay Lightning. So Tampa Bay has beaten them in 5 twice in the last 4 years. So if it's Tampa and Boston in 2022, I'm not going to be taking Boston because Tampa Bay seems to have their number. Pasternak's the leading scorer, 70 games, 48 goals, 47 assists, 95 points. In the playoffs, 10 games, 3 goals, 7 assists, 10 points for Pastrnak. 2020-2021, they finished 33, 16, and 7. Again, it's an excellent regular season for Boston. In the first round, they take out Washington in 5, getting revenge from 9 years before. But in the second round, they lose to the Islanders in 6. The Islanders, a very good playoff team. Barry Trotz, best coach in the league. Arguably, I know there's arguments to be made for other coaches. But Marchand is the leading scorer again for Boston. 53 games, 29 goals, 40 assists, 69 points. And in 11 playoff games, he has 8 goals, 4 assists, 12 points. Again, Marchand leading the team in scoring 1, 2, 3, 4 of the last 5 years. And this is a team that's been pretty good in terms of its goal scoring, but they're known for being a one-line team a little too often, especially over the last few years. Playoff wins leaders. Tuukka Rask, who may or may not come back this coming season, actually leads the Boston Bruins in all-time wins with 57. Jerry Cheevers, 53. Andy Moog, one of my personal favorites, 36. Frank Brimsek, 32, is still on the board. Tim Thomas with 29. He went on an incredible run in 2011, and then, of course, things get kind of stormy for him after that. And he was older, too, at the time where he took over as the Bruins' starting goaltender. The interesting thing, too, being that it took a while before Boston actually said, all right, we'll give him the reins. It was weird because his numbers were always very good, but it always felt like they were trying to get somebody else instead of him. On the points side of things, Ray Bourque is the all-time playoff points leader. It is a shame he didn't get a Stanley Cup ring with his 161 points wearing Bruins colors. Krejci 124 points, Bergeron 120, Marchand 107 in playoff games, Phil Esposito with 102, Rick Middleton with 100, and Johnny Busick had 100 as well. So Boston, a very long, rich history with playoffs, and over the last 20 years, they have that one Stanley Cup. And of course, the question mark going forward is, are they still contenders, or was their best opportunity in 2019, and now we're looking at a team that may have to go through rebuild at some point because Marchand and Bergeron will start getting older. It'll start showing at some point. Pasternak's still good to go. He'll be good for at least the next decade. But at some point, things will have to turn into some sort of a retool or rebuild, but we'll see when. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.